I just want to create a component, give it styling, and don't think about it anymore. Okay, hello. It's time for another Ko-fi update. I have a few different things to show you today. First of all, I'm still working on the next version of Overmind, where I showed you some DevTool improvements in the last video. But I'm also changing how the actions work. So one of the basic features of Overmind is that you have this concept of an action. And it's basically kind of like just a method you call, but it gets injected the state and the effects and the other actions of the Overmind instance. And like in the current version, you can call other actions from actions, but all of them returns a promise with no value. So you can't like return a value from an action. And I think that was a mistake to make it work like that. So in this next version, the actions will work just like regular methods. So if they return a string, they will return a string. If they return a promise, they will return a promise. And that means that you can call actions from other actions and treat it more like if you were like more object oriented. So if you like had a class, you would have multiple methods and you would call a method from another method, maybe just to get the value or whatever. And you can do the same here. And this is also beneficial in components. So if you call an action from a component, you might want to check the result of that action to maybe do something in the UI. The only thing which I'm kind of like, I'm not perfectly sure about is this thing where, like you might have an action that you only call from within another action, but it will be publicly available to be called from the outside. So there's like no concept of a private and a public action. Which is kind of like this, how you can relate to it, and I'm not sure how we should treat that. Should it be by like convention? Like, for example, in the Dart language, private methods are like with a underscore in front. Maybe that's perfectly okay here. So if you define an action with an underscore first, that is just a convention of telling the developer that this is like a private action. So it's only supposed to be used from other actions. You could also like create a namespace called private, and then you could have like private actions there. I'm not perfectly sure, but this is still under development. Anyways, I've also been working on, I'm having this presentation on the 13th of May, and I'm going to have a small rehearsal for it at work. But I've been like, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to say? And I started writing this article related to the release of the next Overmind version, which I'm calling UI as an implementation detail. And I think it's really interesting, especially for a talk, because it's not like talking about the API of Overmind. It's more about just playing around with the perspectives of developing apps. So what we're doing in this article, which I'm going to like transform into a presentation format, is that we are setting up a project just like normal, but instead of firing up the browser, we fire up the Overmind DevTools, and we actually connect to it just like we would like type it in the browser. And then you get up an empty object because it's like an empty application. And then we take the to-do MVC application, and then we start talking about, okay, what kind of state does this application need to work? And then we go through and define that state. We get into derived state, which is really important. And then we start talking about what does this application need to do? And kind of like the underlying message here is that how is the process of developing apps, like you just get a design mockup from your designer and then you just start implementing it. I worked in many projects where it works exactly like that. And also it's kind of like split, like the way you develop is you have multiple developers and each developer work on a single feature, which is not ideal. Like it works, but it's not ideal. So the underlying message here is that what if you separate the process of identifying state and interaction with the actual design and UI. So here I'm showing the Overmind DevTools, and then I show off, let's see, Storybook, which is kind of like the opposite, where you don't talk about the state and the effects and the application in that sense. You only talk about how things should look. And it's really interesting how you start naming things and think about things and discuss things when you have this approach to it. Anyways, it's more of a like thinking of things from different perspectives than saying like this is how you should work. But anyways, so yeah, I just wanted to show, I forgot to show you the changes I made related to these actions. So on the Overmind website, I used like the operators API, and that's kind of the point here. Like we have actions now, and in the next version, you will have actions that you will more typically call from other actions in composing your application logic that way. And then you have the operators, which is the functional API. So in the website now, I rather created a factory, an action factory. It takes an action, it runs some logic, and then it returns that action by calling it. So for example, when I open the home page now, with the route, I define my action. So that means when the DevTools run, it treats this logic and this logic as the same action. And this just handles like the theme and everything. But I'm still using operators. So for example, here in change query, I am using operators because this search thing is super complex and the operators are much better at expressing that logic than plain actions. And then I went to the DevTools, but I decided not to make any changes there because I think the operators shows much better what is going on when we receive a message from the client. It's just cleaner. It's a lot of logic here, and we could do like, maybe we could call like actions from this on message action. We could have an if here, and then we could have like a switch, and we could call more actions, but it wouldn't be any better. Like this is super clean and to the point. So it's kind of interesting how you can decide what approach to do, and you can kind of like level up. Anyways, talking way too much about this. I wanted to show you something else as well, because I've been battling this thing where you have a menu you want to open, you want to click something, you want a menu, and then you want to close that menu by clicking outside. And this is actually surprisingly difficult to do, especially in React, because you build your logic into this component you click on, but to close it, you have to click something outside that component. So how do you solve that? And I think I did a small demo where I only used CSS, but someone pointed out it wouldn't work very well on mobile. So I've been taking this other approach now, which I think is super ideal. And that is this thing. So I can click it, we get the menu there, I click outside, and it closes. But it doesn't close when I click inside it. That's, of course, important. So how does this work? We have some internal state. I'm just doing a simple thing here to show or not show that menu. And then we have one container, which is the actual button that opens up the menu. And what's important about that container is that it has position relative, because we're going to put some stuff inside it. That's the only thing really. It needs to have position relative, and all this other stuff is just for for showing it off, but position relative. And then you can have like an icon inside here or some text or whatever, like, or a button, or it doesn't matter. And then if you show the menu, you want to display two different elements. And I'm using a fragment here because these two elements can be siblings, where the first one is an overlay. And this overlay is only used to catch the clicks. And then the second element is the actual content of the menu. So what happens here is that this first element is a fixed element taking up the whole page, and that's all. Like, it's just a transparent div taking up the whole page. And then we have the second element, which is the actual content, and this content is positioned absolute, so it will be relative to the button we clicked here, where I'm saying left 100% because I want it to be on the right side, and like, it doesn't matter where you put it. But that's all, like, absolute, and like, this is very simplistic CSS. And then when, of course, when I click the button, it opens up the menu. And then when the overlay is present, if I click that overlay, then we first want to stop propagation because we don't want the click to go back up to the menu so that it opens up again. But we want to close that menu. And that's all you need. And now you have everything contained inside the one component. It also ensures that, for example, if I were to click an input over here, or another button, it doesn't actually click it because this overlay is above everything, which I think is a tiny detail that is really important. Yes. You might have to use some set index here if you have multiple menus and stuff, or you use set index on other stuff. But this is the basic idea, and I can put this link in the video. But again, if you want to click something in here to close it, you just put that in the logic of clicking inside here. Then you again point to set show menu false. So I think this gives you the most control with the least amount of CSS and elements, and also in isolation. Everything's inside this component. Everything runs in React's event system. And yeah, I just wanted to show that off. And yeah, I've been working more on Flutter, been iterating on our family app, and we're actually going to use Flutter on this startup project I'm working on. The reason is simply that this is a kind of business where the users would expect there to be an app in the App Store. That's one thing. But the other thing is that we need notifications. We need those freaking notifications, and Safari doesn't support it yet. And maybe they do in like 6 months, and we could do it on the web, but we don't know. So we just know that we won't lose anything by going with Flutter because of notifications. But because even if Safari gets notifications, we still have like an app that people expect the startup to have. But it's a really difficult thing because I want the web to work, but it's there are limitations to the web, and just as a platform for engaging people and all that stuff, it's really interesting. I'm still learning, but at least now I'm not like sitting in the web world just bashing on native apps. Now I'm actually trying out native apps and try to figure out how that works. And I definitely think it's the best approach for this startup. What's really interesting though is that it's a content consumption app. So we build the content on the web using, I want to show that later, but it's really interesting because you can't, like typical CMS solutions, content management solutions, either uses Markdown or it renders like it has HTML, and that doesn't work very well in a native app. So we have our own data structure, which I'm going to show you, which allows us to render out content by transforming it into Flutter widgets. Anyways, I will show that later. Last but not least, I want to show you something really cool. I've been talking about CSS and styling for a while, ranting about it, because I think it's just such a pain that we're still constantly thinking about what is inline styles, what is CSS, class names, isolation. There's so many things I don't want to think about when I do styling. I just want to create a component, give it styling, and don't think about it anymore. And the one project that got me pretty far with that idea was Emotion. Let's see, Emotion, because it has this concept of a CSS prop, where you just, you give it CSS and you give it styling, and then it automatically transforms it into a CSS class. The problem is that, first of all, you have this part. You have to have a custom JSX factory. You have to have a custom attribute. It breaks TypeScript because of these selectors. So the keys here, you don't know if you're using the wrong keys, because it needs to support any key. Another thing is that it doesn't support dynamic content. So if you had like a width here with a variable, it wouldn't be able to solve that. It just would keep everything and produce a class name every time, which is a problem. So I talked to my partner in crime, Fabrice. He's been helping a lot with Overmind. And I asked him, like, couldn't it just work like this, which I'm going to show you now? And then we looked into Emotion, and then we just created, well, he did. It just created a plugin, which just takes care of these issues. And what this will end up as is a bubble preset. So you just install like something like bubble preset React style. And when you install that and use it, it will just work. What I'm going to show you now will just work. You just install that and everything's taken care of for you. So let's see here. Let's minimize this. So what we see here is this text I showed you. Let's see. Let's jump back. Hello world. And we don't have any styling here, but as you can see, this looks just like a normal component. We import React and everything. But now I'm going to create a style here, and I have TypeScript working here. So let's give it a color of red, and let's have a look at what actually happened. So what happened here now? You might think that this became an inline style. But it actually isn't. It changed it to a class name. And the reason it changed it to a class name is because it's static. It doesn't need to be inline. It can just be a CSS class because it's static. So that's a point. Like, this is what we want. We want our dynamic content to be inline styles, because that doesn't work very well with class names. And we want everything that's static to be class names, but we don't want to think about that. That's like an implementation thing. But what if I change the background color now? So if toggle, then I want it to be red, or I want it to be blue, or maybe yellow. And I save that. When I click it, it turns yellow. But as you can see in the development tool, it's actually an inline style, which is exactly what I want. So the point here of this bubble preset is that you're just enhancing the style attribute. You're just making it more performant. So it automatically moves all the static stuff into class, and it keeps all the dynamic stuff as inline styles. And then you have, and this is Emotion. You just don't know it is. And that's kind of like the point. You shouldn't worry about the technology here. This is all about developer experience, and you get all the performance under the hood. And this also works with server-side rendering, so you will get the critical CSS and everything straight out of the box. What's also kind of cool here is that you can of course use selectors. So if I use this property, we can define selectors here. So I can say hover, and this is basically just because of TypeScript we do this, because now we still have the typing here correctly, and we can say color is purple. When I hover, it changes, and then we have everything. So this is what I want as a developer experience. I just want this styling to work. I just want one attribute, do my freaking styling, and it just works. And then you might say, oh, what about style div and all that stuff? Well, I don't like style div. One reason being it just hides too much stuff. So, for example, again, if I do dynamic stuff, it doesn't handle it. If I pass in a property that is going to toggle some CSS, then it might leak into the DOM because it just puts all the props right into, passes it to the element. So I don't like that. And it's an additional API. But you don't have to use that. Like, for example, well, just to say this, what I do like about it is that you can say like wrapper style div or header. So it gets more declarative. But you don't have to use that API. We could fix this thing. We could just put this h1 up here, blah, 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 h1, and instead of there we go, we can give it the children, and of course we could give it the on-click to be on-click. So we are in control of how this header should work. Let's just simplify it a little bit to get my point through here. And now we have our component and header. So you could put this like in an elements file or whatever, but the point is that it's a little bit more syntax, but that's not what we want. We don't want less syntax. We just want stuff to work, and we want control of our code. So I think this kind of hits this sweet spot, at least for me. It's exactly what I've been waiting for. But I just had no idea how to get the underlying stuff to work. But Emotion has that. Emotion has everything. It's just the approach with the CSS prop and breaking TypeScript and all that bothers me. So anyways, we're just testing this a little bit. It's currently just a plugin, but we're going to make it an actual preset. And we're going to release it. Okay? Shit, this was a long episode. But okay, that's all I wanted to show you. Have a great week. I hope this made sense and what's kind of cool. And I'll talk to you later.